Okay. Jeez, where do I begin today? I begin by looking blue. I look blue. Also, I didn't bring the microphone over. This is what happens. It gets like later on a Friday afternoon. I have like literally one sip of beer. This wasn't full to the top either. This is a normal 375ml can. One sip of beer, and I lose my mind. Anyway, regardless, I do look blue. There's something to do with this camera where sometimes the color just goes a bit weird. But the good news is now that the microphone's in place, the sound should actually work, which is kind of the most critical thing, really. Steve, come on, Troy. I have limited whiskey. Boy, I'm not sure how to take that. I could read that many, many different ways. Now, speaking of many, I do have many things on my agenda for today. And where do we begin? All right, so I just tweeted a whole bunch of things which are going to be on the list, but I'm going to begin with the obvious thing, which is sponsors. So sponsor this week is safepass.me. Get a free password audit on your Active Directory users with PwnCheck from SafePass.me. Now, SafePass has been on here many times before. SafePass is a vendor who I have actually spent time with, which is one nice thing. In London, I have spent time with them. I don't get to go to London anymore. In fact, I don't really get to go anywhere anymore. But as I've said before, with sponsors, it is nice when I get to have a personal relationship with sponsors, and SafePass is one of those. Speaking of personal relationships and things we've done together, they have posted a blog post today about complying with NIST password guidelines in 2021 with an introduction from me, which is nice. Now, this is another one of these really nice symbiotic relationships where SafePass uses some of the pwned passwords data in order to help organizations not use passwords that have been pwned, or help organizations not have their staff use passwords that have been pwned. And the nice thing with this is that they're referencing the NIST guidance. Now, the NIST guidance is the guidance that I took and then wrote Authentication Evolved, Password Guidance for the Modern Era a few years ago. And it's got lots of cool stuff in here, which they've got here in their blog post around things like, what are the NIST guidance? What about things like password links, password uniqueness? So a lot of NIST guidance started to say, how we have all these arbitrary complexity criteria where we say you got to have an uppercase and a lowercase and a number and a non-numeric, a non-alphanumeric character. And this was our guidance for like ages and ages and ages, because the mathematical logic of this is that the more characters that you have and the broader the range of character type, if we multiply all of this stuff out, then you have a broader range of possible passwords. And because humans act just like random number generators, this is going to be good. By the way, humans don't act like random number generators, and they're going to do things which are actually really, really predictable, which is why that guidance never really, really made a lot of sense. So NIST came along and said, well, what we should be doing is we should instead be looking at things like not using passwords from previous breach corpuses. So, for example, if you were in the LinkedIn data breach, and remember LinkedIn had SHA-1 hashes without a salt, that would be a very bad data breach to have your password exposed, and you've got to assume that it's going to be converted back to plain text. Unless you're like me and you had a randomly generated one from one password, in which case it's never being converted back to plain text. Quantum computing aside, even though that had no salt and all the rest of it. So anyway, let's make sure that the passwords which are known to be bad and known to be leaked aren't used at all. And this is the value of PwnCheck from safepass.me and why they have written this piece just here. So go and have a look at that. In fact, just to make things interesting so people can read stuff along the way, I'm going to drop that in the comments here of the YouTube channel, and I will also drop that into the blog post after I publish this video and I have all the references and things like that. So long intro there, but thank you to safepass.me for sponsoring the blog this week. Now, looking at some of the comments in here as well. Someone's drinking champagne, someone's drinking whiskey. Howie's Road. So Howie's Road, that's one Tasmania, isn't it? I quite like the idea of that. Tasmania, the last remaining state that I have not been to yet in this country, which I think might be on my agenda possibly around later this year, because the news that we're getting today, and it's probably not too too surprising is that the chances of us getting vaccinated and traveling overseas come the end of the year, which was my original hope, perhaps not as good as what we thought they might have been a few weeks ago. So anyway, maybe I'll go to Tasmania, go and drink some Hellier's Road. Okay, Lance had a few beers. I remember Lance. Sadly, but not local craft beer down at the office. And of course, there are people reading this going, wow, you get to go to an office, which is really, really different. And Chris is referring to UK's NCSC guidance. So the NCSC guidance has done some really, really good stuff. The National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK has created a lot of really, really practical guidance. And in fact, the blog post I wrote about Authentication Evolved largely consisted of NIST and the NCSC's guidance. So very good. Good friends at the NCSC. If you Google my name and them, you'll find a lot of really cool stuff we've done together. They also took the 100,000 most popular passwords, in-phone passwords. I gave it to the NCSC in plain text because they're good people, rather than the hashed versions, and they made that available as well, which is really cool. Steve says, get down here, distilleries galore. I'd love to get down there, and if I do, I'll let you know in advance, and maybe we can go and drink some whiskey, which would be good. All right, so moving on to other things, because it is my plan to do this somewhat expeditiously and then go out and have a nice dinner, which we haven't done for a while. So I might post a photo of that. I might get dressed up and look presentable for for once, which would be nice. All right, lots happening. Now, cashless economy. So I mentioned cashless economy. I asked a question yesterday, mostly directed at folks in Sweden about going cashless. And the reason for this is that about 45 minutes ago, I did an interview with Sky News in Australia. I think that's going to go to air sometime today, about cashless economies and the premise of effectively moving away from paper, largely paper money, and moving to digital money. Credit cards, watches, cryptocurrency didn't come up in the discussion, but of course that is a digital alternative. And it's a really interesting thing which differs enormously based on where you are in the world, what your demographic is, and I think what your propensity to plastic money is versus the old stuff. And I shared a link with folks in this tweet yesterday, which was to an article about Sweden, because Sweden does seem to be probably at the forefront of the world in terms of moving away from cash to largely credit cards and other forms of payment. It's not all credit cards, it's debit cards and things like this as well. And I was sort of asking people, like, this article was painting it as a little bit dire for some people, like there are people who depend on cash. And there's really, really interesting arguments both ways. Now, just to set a caveat, I almost never pay for anything cash. I thought the only time I'd paid for anything cash in living memory, living memory being this year, because everything before that's a blur, was my son was playing a tennis match on Saturday, and we had to pay $10 for him to join the match. And this was at a very, very small club. And I was like, oh, here's my watch. I'm going to pay with that. And the lady was like, no, like, we're a tiny, tiny little club. Where's your cash? And I had it in my wallet, which I left in my car. And before you're thinking I just leave my wallet in my car the whole time, it's going to get stolen. It's like literally parked in front of the tennis club. So I had to go and get cash. And I so infrequently pay with cash. It was like, well, what do you mean I can't wave my magic watch in front of your machine? And then someone made a comment today and they said, yes, and even the Bunnings sausage sizzle is going to credit cards as well. Now, for those of you not from around here, Bunnings is a big hardware chain in Australia. It is a thing that they do a sausage sizzle on the weekends. And Charlotte and I were down at Bunnings, must have been about 2 weeks ago, and she smelt the sausage, which that sounded terrible. She smelled the Bunnings sausage sizzle and immediately wanted one. And we went over there and they wouldn't take card, only take cash. And it was like, well, okay, that's us out. So they're honestly the only two occurrences I can think of recently where I haven't been able to pay with my wrist. And even places where only at the beginning of last year, pre-COVID, would not take a card. So for example, the local news agency here, you had to spend at least $10. So if you wanted to buy a newspaper, or the coffee shop over the road, if you wanted to buy coffee, you couldn't do it. Now you can actually pay with card, or in my case, wrist. So that has changed a lot here. The exceptions that people seem to continually raise, and I'm just I don't completely understand them, but I think that's more my understanding as opposed to it not being a thing. But the exceptions that regularly get raised are around, say, the elderly. Now, I think my parents qualify as elderly. They're in their 70s. They both pay with their phones a lot of the time. They both had credit cards since as long as I can remember. I'd really like this not to be blue anymore. Why is it so blue? Anyway, so they both paid with credit cards as long as I can remember. They both have phones. My dad got an Apple Watch recently as well, so he's paying with his watch. I don't fully understand why elderly people who have had decades and decades and decades of credit cards can't pay with credit cards. And again, I think that's maybe my misunderstanding. One of the examples that was given is the tooth fairy. How is the tooth fairy going to pay the children if there is no more cash? Now, my kids have a service which is available in Australia. I'm not sure in other parts of the world there's probably similar things, called Spriggy. And Spriggy is a way of parents paying kids pocket money that goes into an account, and then they have a debit card against that account. Now, in case this sounds either A, very privileged, or B, just like super, super sophisticated, it actually makes a huge amount of sense. And it's simply this. You can set up a recurring payment, number one. And number two, you can then set your kids goals about how much should you save, how much should you spend on yourself, how much should you possibly then go and give to charity or something like that. And then, because it is all electronic, you can go through and you can see what they do actually spend their money on. And they can take their little debit card and they can tap it on the machine, and they can learn how adults usually spend their money. And not only that, but I can add the cards to my watch. So even if they haven't got their cards and we're out one day and they go, look, I really want to buy, so for example, we've got my son loves to read. If you want books, you have a budget for books. So you buy the books with your Spriggy card and I can just wave on there. Anyway, he lost a tooth the other day. And it's like, okay, what's a tooth worth these days? You know, it's I think it was like, okay, we will make this a $5 tooth. It was a big one. A $5 tooth. And I just transfer the money via Spriggy. Now, I know that takes a bit of the magic of the tooth fairy out of it. My point is that even for children, there are mechanisms by which we can do this digitally. So I'm just not sure that that's a good cash example. Now, there is then the argument that cash is used predominantly by those wanting to evade detection. Tradies, for those who know other parts of the world, tradespeople, might be a plumber or an electrician or something like that, say, just pay me cash. Because if you pay me cash, it's not on the books and I don't have to pay the tax on it. That's not really what we want as a society. If you're kind of not paying, I know it's attractive when someone says, look, I'll give you a discount if you pay cash. But if you don't pay tax, someone else has got to pay the tax to build the hospitals and the roads and everything like that. So that's basically, that's not even tax minimization, that's avoidance, and that's got a different problem. So there's that, and then there's the argument that, look, it's cash is used for things like buying drugs. Let's not even get into Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. So there are certainly a lot of cases where there is nefarious use of cash because of its lack of traceability. However, and this was the big discussion that came up on Sky News today, there is also the whole privacy side of things. So when you do pay for things via not just something on your watch, but via a credit card. Remember the old days when they used to do the swipey thing? There's a record of it that goes on there somewhere. Now, do we necessarily want to have that for everyone and for every purchase? I think there are arguments to be made not to. I don't necessarily agree with the arguments that were made by Sky. In fact, this was Corey Bernardi I was talking to before. He was an Aussie politician, now a journo, in that his concern was, well, what if insurance companies start increasing your premium because they can see you spending a lot of money on stuff like beer, therefore you're at a higher rate of a heart attack, and they're going to, knock your premiums up. I think that we can deal with that via a combination of legislation in terms of the privacy of transactions. And also, you got to draw some pretty long bows, right? It's like I'm spending $200 at Woolies on a big shop. Woolies is a shopping center. Now, am I buying like legumes and brown rice, or am I buying soft drink and chips? You don't know just from that line item. I think whichever way you cut it, it's all going to go digital, and cash is going to be unlimited days anyway. So I kind of sort of take the view that it would be good as we go down this road to keep privacy in mind and to find privacy-centric ways of making purchases, but also acknowledge that cash is on the way out. Now, there's a lot of comments that have come here whilst I have been going on about the cash side of things. James says, only time I've used cash since the start of lockdown is to pay at our local Chinese takeaways. I don't take cards. Well, see, I mean, to be honest, when I get takeaway now, it's usually Uber Eats, and that's, of course, all online, which is that. Comments here from Denmark. We have had Duncourt since 1983. Before that, most people use checkbooks and cash, which is interesting. There's some smiley faces here. I think at my slip of the tongue a little bit earlier on. But it's just interesting how consistently people are moving away from cash to cards and things. Someone actually posted a response to my tweet showing how they were paying for something with a biometric chip. So I literally insert into their hand, just like Scott Helmet does. And I'll tell you what, that looked bloody painful when you got that. So lots of people, I mean, comments here around cash is king. I'm so happy not having cash. What I'm really looking forward to is that my state here in Queensland is currently trialling electronic driver's licenses. I believe they're already rolled out in New South Wales to some extent. We know that they will roll out everywhere, but I would love to get to the point where I just don't take my wallet, because it's just one other thing to remember. And then I would love to get to the point where I don't take my keys. Now, I don't have a car that you can unlock with a phone like a Tesla or anything like that, and I don't have an electronic lock on my door, but I'd love just to get to the point where it's like, okay, I have the phone, which is sitting over there charging, and I have the watch, and that's it. I would love to have less stuff to remember, less stuff to lose. And the hiding the tracks thing, I don't want to be the person who's like, if you've got nothing to hide, then what's your worry kind of thing, because it's not that. It may just simply be that you have nothing that you want to share. But certainly for me, it's a very, very rare occasion, and I won't go into detail, but there's a very, very rare occasion where I spend money that I wouldn't be comfortable other people knowing about. Use your imagination. All right, I'm going to move on because I am limited on time today. I got a book today, so it's always nice to have physical things. I got a book in the mail from Tanya Junker. So Tanya is She Hacks Purple on Twitter. We've done a few interviews and things before. She published a podcast just very recently with me. And it's nice because when I open the front of the book, and this book, by the way, for people listening, is Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. It's published by Wiley. And then right down the bottom, the very first page, is a comment from Troy Hunt, creator of Have I Been Pwned? Very good. And this looks like it's got a ton of really good stuff in it as well. I mean, I know what's in it because I did actually manage to see it earlier on. But loads of stuff in here on AppSec around everything from security fundamentals, the security mandate, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, security requirements, never trust input systems. Very sound advice there because all sorts of weird stuff comes in there. HTTPS everywhere, TLS. When I was flicking through this before, I found a bunch of stuff on content security policies, which of course is very good stuff. Public key pinning extension for HTTP, which is HPKP, which of course is now dead in all the browsers, but still relevant information. HTTP verbs, session management, bounds checking. So a whole bunch of stuff in here from Tanya's book. And Tanya is a lovely, lovely, smart, very down-to-earth person as well. So if you want to grab yourself an interesting book to read or to flick to some other people who may not have been as enlightened as you around the AppSec stuff, go and grab Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. I'll put a link through to Tanya's book in the show notes as well. So there's that. Now, audio gear. So my trusty Logitech something, I can never remember the code of it, has died. Now, I've had this Logitech unit for, it must have been 15 years. It wasn't intended to be a PC setup originally. It's intended to run in the bedroom and give me a little bit of surround sound there for the TV. It died. Now, to be clear, when it died, because a lot of people are like, can you just replace the fuse? It just continued to cut out. Like it wasn't like the fuse is dead and you can no longer play any sound whatsoever. I could reboot the thing, like it's the old IT thing, right? Like, have you tried restarting it? So I could restart it and it would come back and then it would work for a little bit and then it would just die. And doing what I do, that was just an absolutely unacceptable situation. Because imagine if I'm like in the middle of a workshop or something and, oh, by the way, I've no longer got sound, so I can not talk to people. So I stole my daughter's Logitech something else, which is a bit tinny, and I'm using that at the moment. And I put out a tweet about what's a good PC sound setup. And I thought this would be simple. It turns out that was a very naive statement to make. So it also turns out that you can spend a lot of money actually buying good audio gear for the PC. Now, it sort of breaks down, and I'm just trying to load up what I've actually ordered here. I did post a tweet about it the other day. Breaks down to there is a whole stream of PC speakers. So all the Logitech stuff. You can go and buy PC speakers, Logitech. It's good gear. I was quite happy with the sound on the other stuff. It wasn't amazing, but it was decent. But it also lasted 15 years, which is like a really, really good ROI. I can't remember what I paid for it originally, but it would have been in the hundreds of dollars, unlike what I've just bought. But we'll get into that in a moment. Now, that was fun. Then a lot of people said, well, what you should really do is you should get bookshelf speakers, which are literally the sorts of speakers you'd put on a bookshelf, which would be about yay big for those listening. You drive them off an amplifier. That would actually depend. What I ended up deciding was the right way to go about this is to get studio monitors. It's the term. Still not entirely sure why they're called monitors. But anyway, they're high-end speakers, which then get converted or then get driven off a digital to analog converter, so a DAC, which then plugs into the PC. And then I ended up in this really, really nasty rabbit hole cycle of just going further and further and further down the rabbit hole, trying to figure out what is the right gear to get, because it turns out it can get really, really pricey really, really quickly. But then I'm going, yeah, but I live with this stuff every day. I'm going to use it for another 15 years. And I would actually like to have a nicer audio quality. So a bunch of different brands were suggested by people. The one that sort of stood out as the best, but you're going to pay money for it, is a company called Genelec. So Genelec create some really, really nice gear. And what I decided to ultimately do was to get 2 Genelec studio monitor speakers. So they've got amps built into them. They're powered, and then they have XLR connections to get driven off a digital to audio converter. Now, they're going to be a similar size to the ones that I actually have sitting on my desk at the moment, which are I can't even move them because the cables aren't long enough. But they're Logitechs that are around about 19 centimeters high. The ones I got, the Genelecs, are 19 centimeters high. I measured them. And one of the reasons I really wanted those is that they will just fit under my screens here. Now, there will be audiophiles who are like, yes, but you really need to elevate them and put them at ear level. The problem is if I put my arms out, my screens come out to here because I've got a wall of screen, the ultra wide there, and then the 2 other wides next to it. So I just simply cannot get it at ear level. I thought about, do I mount them on the wall up there? But then they're starting to get further away, quite a distance further away, and they have to be very high. And I kind of want to have that more cosseting sound. So anyway, I ordered a couple of Genelec somethings. Why doesn't this actually show me here on the place I ordered them on? Here we go. Ordered a couple of, you know why? Because they broke it into multiple orders. That was my problem. All right. I go to Twitter. There is a tweet that has exactly what I ordered in. I actually changed a few cables later on because I realized that they were not quite long enough, but everything else is fine. What did I order here? All right, here we go. All right, the Genelec Classic Series 8010A. Probably some people listening to this going, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. But if you're like me 4 or 5 days ago, you'd have absolutely no idea what it is. And they kind of look like normal PC speakers. in terms of size and appearance, but they're just very expensive and they're meant to be very good. And then I paired that with the Genelec Classic Series 7040A subwoofer as well. So it's should be a fairly beefy sub. So the two speakers will go into the sub. Sub will then have two lines that will come from a digital audio converter. I end up getting an Apollo twin USB 3 that will actually also be able to replace my Yamaha audio interface that my mic presently goes into. So I'll actually be able to get rid of one item, get a much cooler item in, and it will take the microphone in. In fact, it's got two lines in. It's got four lines out. I'm only going to need two of them for this. And hopefully that's going to be everything and it's going to be awesome. So I did eventually pull the trigger on that just a few hours ago. And hopefully by the time I do this next week, I'll have that new setup and I'll be able to talk about it. Now, the Logitech stuff has gone to the e-waste graveyard in the sky. So it's 15 years old. I was happy to upgrade it all anyway. End of financial year, not that too far away, business deduction, so on and so forth. I'm going to get another 15 years out of something else, which is going to be a much, much, much better device anyway. All right. Look at some of the comments here before we go on. We move on past cash. Let the cash go. The cash is going. There's a lot of cash still in here. Now, Marcus said, get the TV out of the bedroom. It's distracting. Very, very good point. Now, I did mention this was 15 years ago, and it's I don't know if it's just me, but it's amazing. Okay, I have a few extenuating circumstances, but it's amazing how quickly your life can change and how massively your life can change in a very short period. I have not had a TV in the bedroom since I moved back to the Gold Coast almost 6 years ago now, and the only TV, there's one TV in the house, and it is in an entertainment area. I never watch free-to-air TV anymore. I've got some massive Crix speakers down there, which was one of the first things I bought when I actually started making money. So they are, I don't know, like 23 years old or something like that. So that's the one place we watch TV. And then it's like occasionally we will watch some YouTube or some Netflix or a movie or something like that. So I reckon I'd probably average maybe 20 minutes in front of a TV per day by the time you're like average out movies and things. I'd easily go a few days without even looking at the TV. The iPad and things like that, different story. But I totally agree. TVs in the bedroom, not a great thing. There are much better things in the bedroom. Let's just move on from that. So that is definitely out of the bedroom. What are the other comments in here? Get the TV out of the bedroom. Very good. Everyone recommended studio monitors. Yes, they did. Something else completely unrelated to that. Studio monitors. Okay, Steve G says monitors are called that because of the frequency response. Incidentally, see how my picture is like nice and got the right color now. I've got to figure out if someone knows why this camera often diverts back to like Smurf mode where I all feel a little bit blue and then it comes in and now it's got the nice color to it, please let me know. Yeah, so yeah, Steve just knows the color too. So we're back. We're back. Anyway, all right, so moving on. That was the audio gear. Now, Microsoft Exchange vulnerability. So this one seems really, really bad. And it's also one where I have made a conscious decision not to do any interviews about it. And the simple reason is this. I've got this really, really confusing title. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director. And as I jokingly say to people, including the Sky News bloke just before, so I don't have a region, I don't direct anything, and I don't work for Microsoft. The reason I'm avoiding commenting on stuff like this is not, I can send that call to voice, it is not because I don't want to talk about a vulnerability as Microsoft stuff. I don't want it to be misconstrued as though I'm somehow in a position to speak on Microsoft's behalf. And when you have the title director, that's what it sounds like. But all of you understand that, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. So looking at the discussion here, and of course I've based all I know is the same stuff that you guys read on the news. But obviously, Microsoft has had a really, really nasty one here. So the news says 30,000 organizations are thought to have been attacked in the US. It has been attributed to state-sponsored attackers, namely the Chinese in this case. The Russians, of course, was SolarWinds just before China's turn. Attributed to the Chinese, it's exchange on-prem as well. And this is what makes it kind of interesting, because you sort of feel like Microsoft must be in this position where they're trying to drive people to the cloud and drive them to O365. And then it's like, and then there are these nasty problems with the on-prem version. Doesn't this make the proposition of running on the cloud look even better? But clearly this wouldn't have been a marketing strategy. I don't think this is the way it works at all. But you can't help but think, when you're seeing stuff like this, like how many other occasions have there been with all sorts of different vendors where it's like the stuff that they run as a service not necessarily didn't have the vulnerability in the first place. I don't know if that's the case or not here, but at least when it did, it was just patched and supported so quickly. And the thing that comes to mind is Drupal. So we used to run Drupal at Pfizer. And when there was the first Drupalgeddon, I think there's been like 3 Drupalgeddons now of serious vulnerabilities like SQL injection. The stuff that was professionally managed, so we used to run on a platform called Acquia. So when Acquia managed all their Drupals, as soon as there was a vulnerability, they're like, bang, patch, just done. For everyone else who then had to go out and manually patch and manually upgrade things, there was this long tail where gradually the number of different vulnerable instances reduced and reduced and reduced, but you've got all these people having to try and effectively roll their own or roll fixes out in their own infrastructure. So I think for Microsoft, it must have been a bit of a double-edged sword, where it's like, it kind of makes the point of the value proposition of running a managed service on the cloud, but it doesn't look good to have a premier product like Exchange having some serious vulnerabilities in it. I think that the other thing here, which is really interesting, putting in the context of SolarWinds as well, is to see this continued state-sponsored level, allegedly, state-sponsored level attacks on platforms, which then have a cascading effect on so many different customers who then use those. And it's just a really, really interesting time, isn't it? Where there is so much, as I was going to say critical infrastructure, I don't think that's the right word, but essential infrastructure for organizations, which is now out there and the target of massively well-funded adversaries as well. So very, very interesting time. Great industry to be in, by the way. I always joke there's like a lot of job security in the InfoSec industry. All right, getting back to important things. Lance is asking about what beer I'm drinking. So this is a bent spoke sprocket from Canberra, is the bent spoke. So this is the one, I think I had this, would have been 2 weeks ago, where it's like you peel the lid off and it's not just like a little tab. It's like literally the whole top of the can comes off and you can pour it really nice without it glugging. Stefan David, maybe I'm pronouncing that right or wrong, says, as a service has the advantage, the underlying platform management, the provider's responsibility, where you better make sure the provider is doing a good job of it. And that's very reasonable on both comments. It is the provider's responsibility. And I guess the thing is whether it's Microsoft with Exchange or whether it's Amazon with managed VMs or whatever it may be, or Acquia with Drupal, as the comment was before, when this is sort of their bread and butter to provide this service, and they've got literally thousands of engineers and support people there managing it, they're almost certainly going to be in a better position to do a better job of it than pretty much anyone else. And when I think back to those days at Pfizer, and that's just, I'm just picking them because they're a big multinational and I've got a sense of how they work. Like, all right, they had some smart people there, but they're never going to be able to do as good a job of it as any of the major cloud providers or platform providers. So I do agree with this point. And I think the crux of it is that most of the time, the platform provider is going to be able to do a better job of it than an organization trying to support the thing themselves. Steve G says, is it alleged? I thought the attribution was clear cut. I don't know if the Chinese have admitted it yet. So I'm sure if you were to ask them, if you have a line to China or something, there might be a different view of it. But look, I mean, all we know is what's in the news, right? In just the same way as SolarWinds was the Russians. Supply chain and state-sponsored is the new norm. It does seem to be. All right, back on the beer. Marcus is called a big mouth. So well named. Michelangelo Van Damme. epic name, by the way, says, as a small business owner, I prefer to pay for services to save my time and headache upgrading systems. There are better things in life I can do instead, and that's process. That's a really good comment. So I wrote a blog post. I'm going to drop it in the comments here. And it is called, Here's How I Deal with, I think it was like platform outages or something like that. Now, this blog post, here it is. Here's how I deal with managed platform outages. I'll drop this in the comments. This blog post is just like photo after photo of me laying around in the pool with my feet up or on the jet ski or something. And it was a little bit tongue in cheek, but the point I was trying to make, and this relates to Ghost as a hosting platform in my blog, is when there is a platform outage on a managed provider, it's not your responsibility. It's their responsibility. So Ghost goes out, I go and lay in the pool and put my feet up because there's nothing that I can do about it. If I had to run it myself on a VM and my VM went down, it's like, okay, this is now 100% my responsibility. So I really like the premise of delegating this to someone else. And I think Michelangelo's point here is extremely valid, which is that particularly for business owners who want to focus on making widgets. They make great widgets, and all they want to do is make widgets. They want someone else to manage everything from the hosting of the web platform, which is what Ghost is, through to managing the mail provider. And I honestly cannot think, if I was going to talk to any organization now, a little one or a big one, whatever it may be, and they said they wanted to roll out Exchange, it'd be like, well, it's obviously Office 365. Why would you do anything differently? And I would have said the same thing before this outage as well. And inevitably, this blog post is, 4.5 years old now, October 2016. So there you go. All right. So next thing, let's get back to Gab. Oh, I need more beer for this. Now, I spoke about Gab last week. And Gab is the, I think it's that they're saying alt media is the term I often hear now. The alt media, so the alternate platform to the large social media companies. It's not Twitter, it's not Facebook, freedom of speech, so on and so forth. Now, I had written about their data breach. They absolutely positively did have a data breach. We're going to talk about how we know this for sure in just a moment as well. And Steve says, Gab public enemy number 2. I'm trying to be objective. I really am. They do make it hard. Now, we're going to read tweets in a moment. That's going to make it real hard. But they did have another little problem. And there are multiple things that are interesting about this. So when I wrote about Gab last week, I would say I wrote 90% factual things about the data and 10%, I guess, subjective interpretation of the content and the people on Gab. Now, I would suggest that 10% of content probably aligns with 90% of my audience, including the folks watching this podcast at the moment, except for the people we had to boot off last week that tried to hijack the conversation. But regardless of it may be, putting the politics aside, clearly they had a data breach. The account that I had created on Gab in January was in there. The data had every single air of authenticity that you would normally see in a data breach. I think I've seen enough of them now to have a reasonably informed opinion on that. So clearly they had been breached. It was hard to actually get a clear acknowledgement of that from them. I think at points the CEO did perhaps indirectly acknowledge that, but there was no messaging sent to the people who were impacted by the breach. There was no resetting of passwords. That they're stored as bcrypt hashes, which is good, but because their password criteria is very weak, inevitably a lot of those passwords could be easily cracked as well. Now, when I wrote the blog post, I sort of said, look, here's everything that's in it. It was about 70 gigabytes of data. I think there are about 4 million user accounts, but only something like 60,000 unique emails and 7,000 bcrypt hashes. And Gab did write a blog post about this, and they quoted a bunch of what I put in there. And that they put those numbers in there because obviously the numbers were favorable to the position that they wanted to take, which was that the impact of it was quite small. And they're sort of saying, look, 60,000 email addresses, 7,000 bcrypt hashes, whatever. It's not that bad. And one of the points that I tried to make along the way, and I think I made this point in the audio last week as well, is that clearly there was a vulnerability, a SQL injection, and clearly there was a whole bunch of data that was leaked. Now, the bit in between, which is not as clear, is was there other data beyond what was there. And I know that I explicitly made the point, if not in the blog post and in some of the audio commentary, that just because we've only seen this many hashes and this many email addresses doesn't mean that there weren't more taken. It just means that this is what was bundled up and is now circulating, as far as I know, still in fairly close circles, but is now circulating to other parties who are not Gab. Turns out that was right, insofar as it looks like there were auth tokens, which are also obtained. So someone, they're not going to laugh at this, but someone who was responsible for the breach had a lot of tokens, and they managed to effectively session hijack, I think, about 175 accounts, including the Gab support account and including the CEO's account, and post a message to Gab about the breach and a mosaic, which I believe was the photos of individuals who had Gab profiles. And the mosaic was fairly well done, if I'm honest. And they posted a video just scrolling down through Gab of all these accounts that they'd hijacked, just posting the same content. And then Gab went offline. Now, this is serious, right? It's a super, super serious data breach to have other parties posting under the identities of legitimate users. And Gab did have to acknowledge that, yes, they'd had a data breach and they'd taken stuff offline. I still haven't received a data breach notification. So they still haven't emailed impacted users, even though they have absolute emphatic proof that there was a breach and that the breach is more than just the data which was sent to a number of people, including myself. And they haven't disclosed this. And they haven't forced password rotation. No, they haven't forced password rotation because I'm still logging in with the same 1Password generated password, which is hopefully stored as a bcrypt hash like all the other ones, that I generated in January. And then, are we done with the technical bits? Let me just read the comments before we go on to the other bits. Sounds like a movie. Well, it could be moving. Steve G, did they admit it or just pray? Ooh, we'll get to that. Ali, Andrew Torber posts were comical at the time. Well, actually, let's get on to posts. So Andrew Torber is the CEO. Now, let's have a look at the Gab Twitter feed. Now, I deliberately have not looked at this today because I thought it'd be fun to read the Gab Twitter feed in real time. And I swear to God, but it's just that's a little bit too close to the Gab Twitter feed. I honestly have not read the Gab Twitter feed today. Let's have a read through, because this just gives you a sense of the narrative. All right, so Gab does a lot of retweets as well. Now, when we say Gab does a lot of retweets, as best I can tell, this is the CEO controlling all of the messaging. I was going to say it's like Zuckerberg controlling the Facebook account, but Facebook has 2.7 billion subscribers, so it's not like that at all. Gab retweets. And if anyone wants to follow along at home here, the Twitter account is GetOnGab. Does not allow replies because free speech, something like that. They've retweeted account here. If baby name trends are assigned, 2021 is going to be magical. So what are the top 10 baby names for the coming year? Okay, so far so good. Number 12, Lilith, not quite sure about that. Number 13, Loki, which Loki, that's in a Marvel comic. Number 14, Lucifer. All right, let's just put that in the category of biblical references. Gab retweeted the next one here, this person. What really drives other media talking heads crazy about Tucker, this would be Tucker Carlson. Oh, I put this in the political comment already, is deep down they know there will never be 1/1000th as influential as he is. Most are replaceable plastic robots, devoid of personality, lacking intelligence, and incapable of having any interesting or unique thoughts. All right, political. Put that in that column. Next one. A country that sends its pregnant women out to fight for it is a country not worth fighting for. What's that in reference to? No idea. Put that in the no idea column, up to 3 columns. Then there's an original Gab tweet. The Gab GOP stands with Gab. Gov Abbott is welcome to get on Gab as well. No hard feelings. Now, this is interesting. This sort of, how did this become political? So Gov Abbott, so he is the Texas governor. Now, he was in the news. Gab was tweeting at him the other day because he's in a video. I forget the words he used exactly, but he was unhappy with Gab. which is kind of funny because I think Gab was quite happy with him because he's the governor that repealed the mask mandate and other restrictions to try and prevent the spread of coronavirus. And Gab is like, yay, freedom. And now he's turned around and he's not so happy with Gab, so they're not so happy with him. It just feels like a bloody schoolyard, doesn't it? Next one, Gab.com, get the shirt made in the USA. And it's like the Pepe the Frog with like a cowboy mask on. As I understand it from Americans, Pepe the Frog seems to be a very racist connotation. I honestly don't understand all the details about Pepe the Frog. Next one, Gab retweeted. Whisper echoes through the halls of Texas Capitol. Destroy Andrew Torba. Greg Abbott. Yes, master. All right. So again, Greg Abbott. Eyeless. This feels like Game of Thrones. I couldn't keep track of Game of Thrones. This feels like the same thing. Let's just park this all in the, I don't know. It's like, you know, something which is horrendous, but you can't look away. This is what that feels like. Anyway, still no breach disclosure notice. Let's just leave it at that. Comments before we move on. Nothing much more substance about this. I think we're all just, oh, Niles just joined in. G'day, mate. You just joined at the end of Gab, like just rewind and you'll see the other bits. All right, look, one more thing I'm going to cover before I have to go and make myself presentable and go to dinner. I did actually do a blog post this week. I got up yesterday with nothing on my calendar. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get so much stuff done. And then multiple people pointed me to a thread on the Home Assistant forum about people being unhappy that Home Assistant had integrated my pwned passwords, my baby, into Home Assistant such that if they had secrets stored in Home Assistant and those secrets were in pwned passwords, they would get a great big alert about it. People are unhappy. They didn't like knowing that their password was bad. And as I was reading through, this thread must have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments just within the last week. As I was reading through them, I despaired a little bit because some of the comments, the overwhelming sense I got is everyone complaining about this is only complaining because they got a shit password somewhere. And rather than fix the shit password, they have come to the forum to explain how happy they are about being told that they got a shit password. And the excuses are a lot of things around stuff like, it's my own network, everything's safe in here. And then there was a bit of a philosophical thing about, I should be able to shoot myself in the foot if I want to. But there was also fundamental misunderstandings about pwned passwords. For example, the assumption that Home Assistant was somehow sending a piece of information off to a third party that could disclose the underlying password. So I wanted to write the blog post because I'm doing a few things with pwned passwords at the moment, which I'm going to hopefully be able to talk about in the coming weeks. And one of the things that is a bit notable at the moment is that the usage has really, really ticked up. And in fact, the last month, when I wrote the blog post yesterday and I put in, here's the last month's usage, there'd been about 909 million queries to the API in the last month. As of today, it's 913 million queries in the last month. Also, the last month includes the shortest month of the year. So if we were to then add another 10% onto that, I think we're probably, by the time we actually roll over into April, going to hit 1 billion queries a month to pwned passwords, which is super, super, super cool. So anyway, I did want to write this up and just kind of squash a few misconceptions about this. And I got to say, like, the feedback from people on Home Assistant has been fantastic. The comments on the blog post have been great. The comments I saw on the thread before I stopped reading it and got distracted by Gab tweets was also really, really good. So I think people reacted to it really well and took it in the way it was intended, which is like, let's just cut through some of the misconceptions here and talk about how this works. So just flicking through some of the headings in the blog post here, one of the things I think is really important is not to treat the home network as a trusted environment, where the extension of that is, because it is a trusted environment, I can take shortcuts with security, such as password strength. And I just chucked a bunch of examples in there about things that go wrong in the home environment and the whole principle of zero trust. If nothing in here trusts anything else, and we assume that everything else on the network is malicious, then that is a sensible way to begin, because if something is malicious later on, you've got some degree of protection against that. Software should guide people down the path of success. Software should drive people to create strong passwords. I agree with what Home Assistant has done here, insofar as there should be guidance about strong passwords. What I don't agree with, and this is something that they are changing, is that this took a lot of people by surprise. And nobody, and me included, because I'm a big Home Assistant fan, nobody wants to be caught by surprise with their software suddenly doing something different today than what it did yesterday. And I get that. I'm totally on board with that. I understand what people are saying here. So it should guide them down the path of success. And incidentally, Home Assistant are adding a feature where you can just disable this, which I think is a good idea. But also we should be taking people down that path of success. Understanding k-anonymity. Now, what's really important is the k-anonymity implementation, and I'm sure many people listening to this already understand this, does not send any piece of usable data about what the password is. This is the joy of k-anonymity. You can make this little query with just the first 5 characters of the SHA-1 hash of the password, and then you get back all the suffixes, and then you see if any of them match. None of this gives me, were I to be malicious and try to save all of your data, it doesn't give me any idea whatsoever about what that password is. And that is the absolute joy of k-anonymity. So anyway, I've gone and spelled that out in more detail. A few people here saying, well, my password's okay. Someone else must have used that password and it was bad. That password wasn't necessarily exposed next to my email address, therefore I'm okay. It's like, well, what does that tell you about your password creation strategy? If someone else somehow magically has exactly the same password as you, what it tells you is that they've got a dog with the same name, or they went to the same school, or they're born in the same year. And if that's the case, that's not very good password construction parameters. That's actually really, really bad. So don't do that. Lots of examples here trying to compare Home Assistant to cars. A Home Assistant is not a car. And these are attempts to explain a concept using IRL terminology. I've written before about how IRL analogies are terrible. There's a link in the blog post to that. They're terrible. Stop doing that shit and just explain technology as it is. Like, if you can't explain technology as it is, work on doing that as opposed to trying to pick something else that you think people can relate to and use that as an analogy to try and compare the thing back to. Just explain the thing properly in the first place. Someone thought Pwn passwords might be sucking down the data of their limited metered connection. Now, Pwn password query, I'm not sure what the outbound request size is, but I would imagine that it is measured in bytes rather than kilobytes. The response size, 13.4 kilobytes, 31 milliseconds. The average web page is 2 megabytes. This is the size of an average web page these days. You're not going to notice this. This is not chewing up your metered bandwidth. This heading says, if this feature sucks, your password sucks. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then really it just boils down to, this is an easy fix. Go and change your passwords to decent ones. Maybe take this as an opportunity to get a password manager. Get the password manager, make strong passwords, job done. So look, that's pretty much what it boils down to. And honestly, like, this is not a hard thing to do. It just takes a bit of effort. Someone in the post here, and I quoted their comment here, made the point that this would take me more than an hour to fix. And I'm like, all right, get up earlier. Last couple of days, I've got up at 5 a.m. I'd normally get up about, maybe not too much later than that. So I set the alarm. I got a lot of stuff to do. So I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to literally just eat into my sleep for a little bit, buy myself some more time and get stuff done. This is not a hard problem to solve. Also, if you did it properly in the first place, it wouldn't be a problem at all right now. Okay. Looking at the comments here, just before we sign out here, Niall says, reminds me of a conversation we had in Redmond in 2013 where someone said, I remember some of the conversations we had in Redmond in 2013. Others are a bit blurry, but that's a different thing. Suzanne, it's a genuine question I've watched a few times and he's usually drinking. Where was the question? Are you an alcoholic? I don't think so. If you catch me on the alternate weeks on drinking coffee, I think I would actually have more trouble giving up coffee than I would beer. But I think if you tried this beer, you'd be drinking it each week too. It's really good. So strong, I have a password that is 2 separate character names, and my 30 short stories are written with numbers. Some of the comments showed really bad password management, hard-coded passwords, and all of this is very, very true. So I think there are a bunch of practices in there which need some reviewing. Should they be reviewed, the warnings go away, everybody's happy. Okay, so that is it. I need to go and make myself presentable. If I'm presentable enough, I will actually post a photo, because I don't post many photos of Charlotte and I at the moment, because we're just like too busy running around replying to people about Gab tweets. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next week earlier in the day when I will be drinking coffee. If you want to tune in then. See you later.